Hello, and welcome to Wired for Change. In a world where things are rapidly changing and AI is reshaping industries, economies face so many uncertainties, and digital transformation is accelerating, cybersecurity stands as the backbone of resilience. But how do we build that resilience? It's not just a matter of protecting our data anymore. It's about innovating and adapting and building cybersecurity into the very fabric of our progress moving forward. There's a lot to explore in terms of how we do that and some very serious topics ahead. But today I'm very happy to have Jarett Perron here with us in our studio. Jarett is the lead at BSides Ottawa and the CEO of C3SA Cyber Security Audit. Jarett and I have known each other and worked together before, and I'm very happy to have learned so much from Jarett on cybersecurity. Jarett, welcome to our show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So I'd really like to start off by understanding a little bit about your background for our viewers, a bit about how you got started in cybersecurity, because the stories of cybersecurity and getting started are so interesting, I think, to people. And I get asked all the time about how to get started. So tell us a little bit about how you got started.
I think for me, it started at a very young age. On the playground as a budding enterprise. I was working with Commodore 64 and Fast Hack'em back in the day. I don't think anybody will remember that. But where things really started to change for me is when
I'm far too young to remember that, by the
way. Okay. All right. I thought this was serious.
I'm sorry.
No, but things turned around for me in my life when I made the conscious effort to go back to school in my late 20s. I went to Algonquin College in the Information Systems Security program. And then out of there, I got hired by the federal government of Canada, where my career just took off from there. I got to work on excellent projects covering architecture, modernization, assessments, digital forensics, incident response on landmark cases, working with Canada's best of the best type thing, getting to be an expert witness at one point in court, right, on some of these cases in support of our national security and critical infrastructure protection. But for me, it was always about, I was always intrigued, and there was always a hunger for continuous learning. And that's kind of what I love, and that attracts me so much to cybersecurity and to the field this day, is that it's always evolving and it can go in any direction. Your career can change into any direction you choose it to take, right, at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Nice. And then there are a lot of students out there. A lot of young people come out to the BSides conference and into other places, and they're looking for ways to get started. And a lot of people are transitioning in their careers as well, going from their current career to going back to cyber. And you made a pivot to go back to school to learn about cyber as well. Do you have any advice for people who are in that situation, who are just trying to find jobs or looking to learn more as you have?
I think it's much easier than it was back then. The field was quite limited and it wasn't that popular when I got started, but I would always start with the basics. I would always start with networking, operating systems, and applications. If you're new coming into it, right? Understand the fundamentals of security. If you're, looking towards cybersecurity as a second career, I would say leverage your key experience that you have today. If you're in risk management or project management, or you're a business analyst, or you're an HR manager, right? In various fields, in healthcare or whatever, each one of those fields needs cybersecurity in those particular areas. I would try to stick with something that is familiar to you, and then also help bridge the gap with cybersecurity. In terms of, I think there's so much out there in terms of YouTube videos and media channels for you to follow today, right? To save yourself from having to read hundreds and hundreds of books. More importantly, there's immersive learning as well, like Try Hack Me and Hack the Box, and various policy villages, and various different formats to actually learn in a gamified environment. And most importantly, which if I could go back and redo my career, I certainly would say is find a mentorship and find a fellowship, like find a community. Don't go at it alone, because you get there quicker together, for sure, with a community.
I really love that. I love that idea of bringing your own domain expertise, even if it's something that is very different from cyber, like nursing or something else, and bringing that and adding that and complementing cyber, with that. Because I think there's a lot of opportunity now to evolve cyber and to evolve how it's approached within different sectors and organizations from different roles in the organization. And so there is something that everyone can kind of bring to it.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. I mean, it touches all aspects of an organization, of an enterprise, including your supply chain, like with your partners and your customer experience.
Super interesting. So you mentioned that the evolution of your career and the evolution of cyber along with it. I think it's really important to always understand sort of where things have come from and a little bit about evolution every time you're looking at transformation, digital or otherwise, to look at how things were set up, why they were set up the way they were, because often there's valid reasoning. And then there's a conscious change that needs to be made, whether it's in terms of mindset or process, or something else. So tell us, a little bit, just like a few sort of perspective, like points in time, maybe, where cyber, pivoted, in your view. How did it change, over time without, asking you to be kind of the Wikipedia entry for cybersecurity? What are some things that you can offer for our viewers?
I would say is in the face of adversity, a major disaster, right? If we're talking in terms of North America, something that rings clear to me is always 9/11, right? The tragedy, and my heart still goes out to those families that have lost loved ones in that. But it certainly showed the weakness in the armor, right? The cracks in the foundation, where an asymmetrical threat, right? Just a small group of people with low expertise and low funding could have such a huge impact, right? So low likelihood, really high impact outcome. And that forced us to look at the traditional security model in a different way, right? And it propelled really cybersecurity, our cyber defense, and our intelligence operations that really propelled the field forward from that point on. I think the U.S. put out a national security strategy in 2003. Canada responded with its own in 2004, and it's been evolving ever since, right?
And how about within the walls of an organization? How has it changed from, maybe who owned cyber initially or who has the accountability for it initially? And how has that changed over time? And we didn't have CISOs at the beginning, right?
That's a tough one. I've been in the business for 20 years. Mm-hmm. We've had over 200 clients, like on land, at sea, in air, in space, right? Servicing those domains, if you will. The obvious answer and the easiest answer is to say it sits with the CISO, but it really doesn't. Not every organization has a CISO. Most often, it depends, like if you're working with a municipality, right, or a small organization in a vulnerable sector, you'll see IT is joined with the CFO, right? So security kind of tucks into there. Other organizations, it sits with a CIO, right? Or even a CAO or a chief operating officer as well. So according to standards, though, I think that's what we're trying to do now with industry standards, right? Is really define it as a particular role, right? And obviously some regulations as well, like the SEC and that, do require an appointed CISO, an officer to the position, to make them responsible for it. But again, those are broad strokes. It's not across every sector at this point in time. Not all ships have risen at the same time.
And as cybersecurity and the understanding of cyber, permeates in different ways across different departments and roles, what is the role of a CISO or someone who, has the ability for cyber in working with other departments? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say it's to be that coach. It's to be, cybersecurity is a team sport. It really is, because the CISO doesn't really own the risk at the end of the day. The business units, right, and on the corporate side, the legal, the privacy, the compliance, right, they own the risk. So everybody has a say in it, right? Where you really need a strong steering committee, and an advisory board to kind of make these difficult decisions, right? And know when some of these risks are too high, right? That they have to go up the chain, right, for sign off at the end of the day. But it's up to the CISO really to coordinate and handle all that, right? Because it's the budget isn't with the CISO. The costs have to flow down to the respective business units and the operations and the current plans that they have for the future, right, to achieve their strategy or their mission. Absolutely.
And I would imagine that there's a baseline of understanding of frameworks and of compliance and requirements that's required across different departments to have those conversations even. And I think that in my experience, there have been a lot of organizations who still see it as kind of cybersecurity as this IT role. It's about not clicking on links in an email, and it's much simpler than maybe it has become today with the changes in the environment.
Yeah, certainly. I watched, I kind of scrubbed through your last podcast with Rich, and who I adore and love. I think he said it best, right? The technical, as part of any digital transformation, right, or any change, is the easy part. The hard part is the processes, right? And the people and the data, right? Making sure that security is integral to that. And really, in order to achieve that, an organization really needs to land their governance, their risk, and their compliance frameworks, right? And the culture needs to shift as well, that that these things are operationalized. They're just not pieces of paper, right? That somebody reads once upon hiring, right? And then
if at all,
we forget, if at all, right? And you'd be surprised. The majority of audits that we do, the traceability from the policies and the standards and the directives, they don't trace down to the cloud configurations or the platform configurations, right? Because there's a gap there, right? From a strategic level to an operational level to a tactical level, right? There's clearly a gap that exists. And I think that's kind of where we've excelled and helped a lot of customers bridge that gap.
One of the reasons I became so interested in cyber, and it wasn't just my role in organizations, but it's how critical, an enabler of cyber is for digital transformation. And it's not something that I knew when I started out in digital transformation, but I was wondering if you could, comment on sort of the relationship between cybersecurity and digital transformation, and then walk us through, a simple example of, what that looks like when you're acquiring a large system or going through a transformation of some kind. What does the cyber piece kind of look like?
Well, I would say that, we default back to first principles, right? And it truly is, when we say privacy by design and security by default, it has to be integral to the future state design. It really does. It means that you come to the table knowing what your current state is, what controls you have in place, what's working, what's not working, right? Where are there gaps, and what are the risks associated with that? You can't do everything in a digital transformation, right? But you need to make sure that you have the baseline minimum requirements, and also you're addressing risk within the context of your operations that you're trying to automate. And hey, at the end of the day, to me, what I always tell people is that security is not just about a bunch of controls and red tape that we put in there to make people's lives miserable, right? It really is about optimizing that user experience. And when I speak in terms of user experience, I don't just mean the end user, like the clients, right? I mean everybody that has a role and responsibility in that platform or that service, right? It could be the privacy auditor, right? It could be a security auditor. It could be the disaster and backup and recovery people, right? All of those people have specific functions, roles and responsibilities in that platform, and need to do a job either under normal operating conditions or increased threat and emergency situations, right? Or, a spot audit by a regulator as an example, right? So all those different perspectives, those contexts need to be considered in a concept of operations, and how are we wrapping security and privacy around that, right?
I think often people think of, security as kind of a barrier to innovation and to moving forward. And I think that sometimes, I've gotten surprised in terms of how actually it's an enabler or it's not, what I thought kind of thing. And I want to build on the idea of security as an enabler, but wondering, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second and ask if you have any, examples of where, it has been kind of an enabler or you've been able to bring an approach to the table that, has really, positioned cyber as an enabler, in a project situation, for instance, or for an organization. And what happens if you don't leverage cyber as an enabler? You're not enabled.
Do you mean like within the context of a digital transformation or just in general?
It could be either.
Yeah. So, I could do both. It still speaks to the same thing. Whether we're doing an alignment with like an industry standard or a regulatory framework, right? Or it's a digital transformation on a large scale project or even a small scale project, really it comes down, and maybe I got ahead of myself in my last response, right? My last answer. It comes down to understanding the workflow and the data flow and optimizing it, right? Security wants to always eliminate and reduce the fat, right? That's what creates the risk, right? And the exposure. If you don't need a particular function or a particular feature, right? Those are the things that we look to remove and reduce, right? Or at least disable, and that, at the end of the day, is where your metrics start to really provide that feedback loop, like in a more mature environment, when we have the right controls, not just on the technical platform itself, but within those operational processes, right? In those workflows. We want that feedback, right? To dial it in further.
Would you say, and I'm thinking from a user experience designer kind of, view here, would you say it's about, reducing the friction to the different types of users and the different roles, but introducing friction to, bad actors or external threats? Is there a balance there?
That's a good question. Hey, like security comes down to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Reducing friction would certainly be part of that, 100%. Because again, at the end of the day, if the system is too cumbersome, like for the end operator or some people, the end users, right, they will find ways to go around it. And to me, when we're doing that threat risk assessment or we're doing that after action report, if there was, unfortunate, if there was an incident, a breach or a compromise, it always comes back down to the same thing. They found a way to work around a system, a control, right? Because it was too cumbersome in their day-to-day duty, right? And I think nowadays operations are so lean and everybody's running so lean, right? That they're wearing many, many hats, which introduces, greater opportunity for incidents, right? So it really has to optimize that workflow at the end of the day. And yes, we're always trying to find ways to make it more difficult for adversaries to compromise the network, right? We're always trying to think in terms of that layered onion, that zero trust, right? To contain incidents, right? So that we put the walls up in front of them, but certainly not the users, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly. It's interesting. I loved your comment about, users always finding a way around and, creating their own user experience, really, at the end of the day. It's such a human thing, right? And so much of it comes down to a very human, part of what we do and how we move forward. You have to be kind of studiers of, humans as well.
Well, and even like within the context of AI, right? Like it's an efficiency, it finds a way to bypass it.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Those are some of the concerns that, we have with AI as well.
For sure. And that's a good segue to a little exercise game that we're going to play next. And so I've looked up, and I'm aware of a number of trends that are emerging for digital transformation. And we're going to play a little game. It'll be in a lightning round kind of format. I didn't bring the timer today, so it's not going to be like you have 10 seconds to answer.
Okay.
And then there's a buzzer. It's
See,
not
that's
gonna
what I was
be-
kind of hoping for, was actually just whatever comes to mind, one word, we're done.
This is episode 2. I'm still figuring this out, Jarett.
Okay,
But
fair
yeah,
enough.
so I'm not looking for a completely exhaustive, answer or a dissertation on any of these trends. But I am going to mention a trend and then look for just a comment, from you in terms of the cybersecurity implications, or a thought that comes to mind, or maybe a question that a viewer might want to ask themselves or do some more research in order to be prepared from a cyber perspective. Does that sound okay?
Let's give it a shot.
All right, let's play. We're going to go through 3 of these. The first one is AI-driven automation and decision-making. Okay, so top of mind, AI is very top of mind now. There's a lot of fear of missing out, but we do know that it is going to be embedded in processes, strategic decision-making, data and analytics, real-time, everywhere pretty much to achieve efficiencies. The use of ChatGPT is quite, common now, I would say. So there's a lot going on with respect to AI on both the offensive and defensive side, I'm sure. So lots to dig into. What's some advice or some thoughts from you?
Well, I mean, first of mind, anytime that you rely on automation, right, AI for automated decision analysis and response without context is terrifying, right? Like that could be a scary scenario, right? There's been enough sci-fi movies on that. I think thinking broader, working all sides of the border, like Canada, US, and Europe, I think the larger discussion right now is regulatory requirements around AI, right? And responsible AI with risk management that includes security and privacy. I mean, if you think today on-prem, right, and in most organizations, we really haven't mastered information management, which is central to all of this and key to all of this, right? We're not really good at data management and data governance, meaning data is not, categorized, it's not classified, it's not labeled, it's not tagged in metadata, right? It's not sanitized. Those are some concerns, and you really need to put in a governance framework, a steering committee, a risk management framework for AI specifically. And there's various standards out there, like the NIST AI risk management framework, or the European AI Act, right, that have guiding principles around that. And then the other thing is to make sure you containerize it, right? Put it in a sandbox, slowly introduce data. Unfortunately, though, I think the vendors, and this is one of my biggest concern, they're sneaking their AI chatbots in and their agents in, and who knows where that's going to in terms of the sub-processors and what they're using in their models to infer based on your data, right? And, it really comes down to that and your vendor management, right? Knowing what's in those contracts and what they can and cannot do with the data.
Absolutely. Important to take a critical look at that and be aware of how, a lot of these vendors will continue to evolve their capabilities moving forward. And so how do you control for that, moving target of what you want as an organization as you continue to test and work with the system?
Well, data is the new gold, right? Everybody wants access to that data for insights, right? And to be able to chunk that up and parse it out and sell it or resell it and repackage it.
Everyone wants it.
Yeah.
That's true. Good or bad. All right. Thank you for that.
Well, that's a really...
Yeah.
Is that it on AI?
Yes.
Because the scary story, too,
Yeah.
from my perspective, like scary world story, would be AI against AI. So bot against bot warfare out there, right? Like right now, you have humans working around the clock with all observable evidence in a security operations center, teams, that are used to handling one-on-one incidents or attacks against them, or, accidents that happen within the environment. Imagine an AI that can simulate multiple attacks and multiple incidents happening all at the same time, targeting you, whether it, whether it's a competitor or it's somebody, a nation state, or somebody that's been, that's got a real motivation against you. So that is something that keeps me up at night as well. That's
If you didn't have enough keeping you up at night with cybersecurity, here's more to worry about.
It is definitely like the next level of threat actor that we should be preparing for sure, 100%.
Okay, gonna leave us on that cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Move to the next one. And that's all we're gonna say about that today. Yeah. Number 2. Acceleration of cloud adoption and data-first strategy. So with COVID-19, we know that there was an acceleration to the cloud, and now we're seeing a shift from cloud-first to cloud-smart type strategies, where you're looking at the performance and the type of data and the type of operations and what you actually need it to do, and then thinking about, well, is it public, is it private, should it be on-prem, and thinking just more strategically about your cloud deployments and where your data is and how to protect it. So any thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, I think the horses have already left the barn, right? And I think we've already bought the farm, right? Most of us during COVID-19.
So we've bought an empty barn, is what you're saying.
It comes back to make sure you have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Because those responsibilities are shared. If you review those contracts, right, the majority of the time, the data is still your responsibility, the responsibility of the end client, right? And in certain situations, depending on what type of cloud you bought or parts of that platform, the ongoing maintenance of it is yours to maintain as well, right? So they're not going to wear the incident on their shoulders in the event of a breach. The other part that I would say when it comes to cloud adoption, again, is just knowing where your data resides, not just in the platform, but as it's being sub-processed, right, to multiple sub-processors. And I would definitely start, monitoring, your connections as well, those trust relationships in and out.
Is this something that any of your clients are voicing to you in terms of concern? Do you know if people are worried about it?
I think it's the other way around. I think we're the ones that are voicing it to them the majority of the time. I don't think a lot of people take the time to read through the contracts and the licensing agreements to really understand what their responsibility is and what their exposure is. So, the majority of the time that we're testing the API connections or we're validating the access controls, right? We do find a lot of low-hanging fruit.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Okay, to move to the next one and the final one.
I think so. Just as long as everybody realizes like a data-first strategy, right? It's about really good data management practices, right? And having data governance,
And from a compliance perspective, would you say that things are evolving still?
I would say that it's very centric on the cloud service provider's platform, or it's on the delivery of the SaaS service. Mm-hmm. Again, be aware, take the time to read the documents when you're looking through their ISO compliance or their SOC 2 or their CAIQ. Make sure you're very clear on what the scope is, what was included as part of that certification, and make sure that it extends to your data or it extends to your operational workflows.
And tie that back somehow to your risk thresholds, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because that will, 100%. That will let you know if you need rework or retrofitting, right? To find additional countermeasures to put in place, right? Or usually monitoring and detection, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. All right.
Or better insurance.
Yeah. Oh, we can talk about that later. All right. The third trend that I wanted to talk about today was hyperconnected supply chains and IoT expansion. So hyperconnected supply chains are loaded up with technology now, with AI and machine learning and blockchain and, real-time everything and intelligence. They're super, super connected. And then with the expansion of IoT devices, we know that's going to expand, and 5G networks will continue to be more commonly available in the world. What are some thoughts that you might have on this trend and supply chain vulnerabilities in general?
Know where your data is, right? Try to align with even if you're not in a regulated field, right? Like finance or healthcare or energy or critical infrastructure, right? Always have positive control of your data, right? And practice good data management. Always verify as well, like verify those connections in that supply chain, right? Constantly audit them, and validate them as well. And again, it is, adopting a mindset of zero trust for those connections, right? And also the API security, Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
And in terms of,
I'm going to hold the applause.
well, yeah, I was just talking about supply chains,
Yeah.
but IoT expansion, that's a really challenging one because what you see is just a flood of devices out there now that are connected to the network. And most of the time, these things have, 3G, 4G cards, LTE, 5G in them, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Lo-Fi, right? All different types of wireless. And these devices are often, they're legacy devices, or they're legacy, like they're really old and they can't be upgraded, or they're neglected in terms of their maintenance. And sometimes in their default configuration, with user IDs and passwords that are easily guessable.
Sounds like a very challenging attack surface to deal with.
It is,
To understate it.
Yeah. And we've seen it from coast to coast to coast. And I've always said, like, if cows learn to hack, we're in a lot of trouble with some of these devices, like around SCADA networks and that, right? Just the configuration and the user IDs.
It might only take one cow.
That's correct. Yeah.
Take down everything.
Yeah.
That's such a Canadian image. We've got the horses in the barn that have left, and we've got the cows hacking the networks. There's a lot to think about.
Well, it's two different approaches, right? Like a lot of those SCADA networks, and we're talking about industrial controls, and it doesn't even have to be in water sewage treatment or in energy or in mining. It could be even in healthcare with medical devices, right? At the end of the day, these things are on the network, right? And they're really hard to manage. They're really hard to monitor because most often they have different channels as well that they can communicate on and bypass our traditional security controls that we have to provide detection, response, and recovery.
And they might be in your home.
Right? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, I mean, well, now time for applause. Thank you. I'm sure if we had a studio audience, our audience would be applauding. Yay! Great job on the lightning round, Jarett. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. I think that it's clear that, each one of these transformations or drivers or tech, it's not just about the technology, which is kind of the easiest part. I mean, it's the people and the process. And each one of these trends brings a lot of risk, with it. And it's critical to look at cyber as an enabler to moving forward with these trends and to, build the scale and the speed and the efficiency that you're looking to build and unlock those opportunities and be able to do that, in a future-proof way. So thank you for those comments. Really appreciate it. And then working with security early, I think, is key as well, would you say?
Yeah, or just, working with everybody in the organization early, that is going to be impacted by the digital transformation initiative that you have, right? All players need to be at the table. You need to have a really strong working group, right? An architecture working group as well, Involve privacy and security from the get-go.
Good. I'm going to pivot a little bit right now to look at cybersecurity and Canada, where we are now. How are we positioned, from a national level? What are some of the things that we've got, and what are some of the things that we need, and who's deciding on these things? I mean, I think that cybersecurity has become kind of synonymous with building economic resilience in a way that maybe some people didn't foresee. And so, as we do that, it behooves us to look at that and think about, well, what do we have that we can leverage, and what do we need to leverage moving forward?
Pass. Not just economic, but also social, political, health and sciences, right? It touches every aspect, like you said earlier, in all fabrics of life, right? In Canadian life. And for sure, I would say, there are a lot of folks that work tirelessly, right, to defend our interests here at home and abroad, and that it is a constant battle, right, against the different types of threats that we face as a nation, not just at a government level, but also, also across our industry and our academia as well are at risk. I think that there is always room for improvement. And I think in Canada, there is more room for improvement than there is, let's say, south of the border in the US or even over in Europe, right? Where, and I think by far and large, a part of that is that we're on an island, right? Our closest neighbor is the US, who has always been a very close ally. But in Europe, you're living, you're potentially in the EU, you're bordering countries that are hostile, right? So they take security more seriously. And that's clearly ingrained in their legal and regulatory frameworks with NIS2 and DORA for critical infrastructure, right? The EU AIA Act, like they are ahead of us. And I think to a certain extent, since I've been in the field, and these are just my own observations, this is my personal observation, not that of my company or any of the organizations that I represent. Our budget has been anemic compared to the rest of the world, like Australia, within the Five Eyes certainly, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and other NATO countries as well, right? Mm-hmm. That have invested more heavily in cyber. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
And then what do you think that does for our ability to innovate, or how can we position ourselves, better in terms of innovation and competitiveness from a cyber perspective?
Well, I think before I would address innovation, right, I would address the immediate impact is when you go and speak to boards, like I speak to a lot of boards and a lot of executives and a lot of managers and a lot of, the frontline people working, right, in various organizations across all sectors, right? There's a real, you can ask them, like, what keeps you up at night? And they will all tell you it's a cybersecurity breach, right? But a lot of them aren't adhering to any particular standards, especially those that don't really work with regulated data, right? Where, there's legal and regulatory requirements around these specific types of data, right? Personally identifiable information, personal health information, credit card, financial information, or even intellectual property as well. I think a lot of that comes from leadership and the current strategy that we have in place today, and access to, information like a Canadian standard. Here is the baseline profile for healthcare. Here's the baseline profile for finance. I think that's missing today. Okay. And I really think that, we need a champion in Canada that's responsible for cyber and cyber alone, as opposed to it being shared across multiple departments.
That's an important idea, I think, and something to consider and to look at.
Yeah.
It's very hard to drive sort of that consistency and change without that centralized oversight.
Yeah. And how that impacts innovation is people don't know how to set up the baseline to containerize innovation, right? We work with a lot of startups and a lot of innovators, and I'd say in the last 5 years, we've seen, in certain ways, VCs and investors, right, start to demand that you align by year 2 with ISO 27001, or that you adopt these different standards, right, to ensure a minimum baseline of security and privacy, because they want to protect their asset as well, right? That the money that they're investing into the company, right, is not going to go out the door with the IP, right, once it's stolen.
Good. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'm going to turn a little bit to some insider buzz. So what, within the cybersecurity community, what are people talking about now? What are some of the things that are top of mind for those in the know?
Well, we don't sit around a water cooler and talk about this stuff. And if we do, I don't call them back. I'm kidding. I think right now, a hot topic that should be on everybody's mind is clearly AI, right? That's clear and present. The other one is the next one on the list. Certainly, it's coming, like a big asteroid hurtling to Earth type thing, and in 2032, if you believe that, is quantum resilience, right? I think that it poses a real threat to the way we live as a society. That lack of crypto. If that were all released to the public tomorrow, and we had no secure means to communicate anymore, it's a real problem.
Let's not just spend 5 seconds just unpacking that for folks so that they have a clearer understanding of what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Quantum resilience.
So, quantum resilience is basically, with the advent of quantum computing, right? It means that there'll be more computational processes to break current crypto that we have. So current cryptography that we have, right? Keys, ciphers, protocols, right? Basically, always to circumvent any encryption that we use today for our communications or for data at rest, right? Where we're encrypting data at rest. So at rest and in motion. And the reason why we do that is to keep secret, right? Or to keep privacy, private communications private. And that's what's coming, right? The current cryptography that we have today is not quantum safe. And that's where we all need to move to, as a nation, right? All together. And that's not an easy feat, right? Because a lot of the protocols and technologies that are leveraged today can't support that upgrade, right? So those are the things that, security folks are really worried about. And I would say, third of mine right now is obviously this trade war, right? This looming trade war, tariffs imposed by the US on Canada. I didn't know if you were talking about just the field in general or if Canadian.
No, anything.
And I think even broader than Canada, over in Europe too. Everybody must be concerned about the potential threat of tariffs imposed on digital products and software. When you start thinking about that, it gets terrifying, right?
Maybe a quick example to illustrate, the type of, concern that people might have or that people have.
Sure. Anybody that buys a product or a license, a digital product or a software license off a US-based company, right? There could be a tariff on that imposed, right? And if your organization is 10,000 strong or 100,000 strong, how many licenses you have, you multiply, you add that 25% onto that, right? That could bankrupt
A lean organization.
A lean organization, yeah, to say the least. I think certain parts of the world are going to be safer, even if the tariffs are imposed, because they may have adopted open source software, right? So there may be some shelter around that, but by far and large, everybody is paying for a license in some way, shape, or form now.
We're all so dependent on our subscriptions and our software. Now.
Yeah. Well, just even imagine, a lot of people are no longer going to the, what is it? The traditional news outlets, right? We're all getting our news from Instagram, or maybe not Instagram, but YouTube, or, imagine those being turned off tomorrow. Imagine those communications being shut down. No more Facebook, no more LinkedIn, no more YouTube, no more Instagram, right? Like, there are tons of Canadians that have earned living off of those platforms, right?
We haven't really got the backups in place
No.
for any of that. We don't have the redundancy in terms of what we consume and how we consume it.
Yeah. So that's all stuff that rattles around in the back of my brain that keeps me up in the middle of the night.
Really big things. What about, cybersecurity insurance, for organizations? It's something that a lot of organizations have had in place for some time. Some question kind of the usefulness, of it. And it's something that I know is top of mind for a lot of CFOs. Even if they're not thinking about quantum resilience, they might be thinking about what's in their cybersecurity insurance policy. Do you have any comments on that in terms of how that may have changed over time?
Changed over time. My relationship with cyber insurance has always been love-hate. So in the very beginning, I think it was an easy way out for senior management to transfer the risk, right, that they wanted to neglect, right? So, or they wanted to avoid. Let's buy cyber insurance so we don't have to do this really hard thing to address these security risks or these privacy risks. I think in the last 10 years, the amount of ransomware incidents, the payouts, the amount of regulatory fines, right, that have been issued, and the payouts, the insurance company has really ratcheted down. And where my opinion on insurance started to change was that even in those sectors that don't have to adhere to any particular regulatory framework, right, it started to institute minimum baseline requirements like multi-factor authentication, like endpoint security, right? These are things to prevent attacks, but also to detect and rapidly respond to them. And at the panel that I sat in on in Montreal about using AI to navigate cyber insurance, one of the things that we talked about was a lot of the insurance companies are now even looking to hook into the insurer's environments to make sure that the controls are in place and that they're functioning as intended and they're producing the desired outcomes. And that's just to limit their liability. So in many ways, it trues up the insurer. It trues up the client who's seeking insurance. And in that respect, I'm all for cyber insurance. But I still believe at the end of the day, you have to do a risk assessment to decide, to make the determination, is it better for us to get insurance or to self-insure, right? Take that money, depending on how big you are, right? And what your scope and your complexity of your organization is, or possibly reinvest it back into your people, right? Or your processes and your technology. So we work with clients on that to help them bridge that gap, because it's not easy territory as well.
No. There's a lot of difficult or rocky terrain, I think, for cyber teams. How do you think cyber teams are feeling these days? I mean, there's a lot that could potentially, overwhelm, a team that may not have all the resources to deal with all of this change or all of the demands that they're being faced with from the business.
It's not an easy field to be in, and mental health in cybersecurity is a thing. Like it's a real concern because our happy path is different than the rest of the organizations, right? We're looking for bad things. And we get rewarded when we find bad things, right? Which means that we need to apply the right controls and constantly be improving those controls, monitoring them and reporting them up. Right. And I often see this, and it's a paradox, because in environments that have reached that point of maturity, that level 5 maturity, right? Yeah. Well, all of a sudden, you see the attacks are coming down every year, right? The reports on incidents and occurrences is reducing every year. You need to find other ways and other metrics, because what senior management and boards typically dial into is that, well, security is not a problem anymore. We're not hearing about it, right? So let's defund security and reroute the money. And then obviously it degrades really quickly over the course of a year or 18 months, right? And then you end up you slide back down that scale, right? But
It's like a boom and bust cycle.
it's, I think one of my professors, that I highly regard from Algonquin College, said it one night in a class. He must have been deflated because he was always a happy-go-lucky guy, right? Just very uppity. But he looked deflated, and he just said, security it's like Atlas, moving that big boulder up the mountain. You gain ground, and then you lose ground, right? And that's it, right? And that's why it's important for it to be a team sport, right? And so that everybody kind of understands that there's give and take. There's certain hills that you die on, and other battles that you give up.
I think what I'm taking away from that is that it's time to show your cybersecurity team a little love today. Send them a box of chocolates or an Uber gift card or something, just to keep them a little bit sane. It doesn't hurt to do that. So thanks.
Good
for
advice.
That. Yeah,
good advice.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna wrap up soon
All
in
right.
terms of our show today. We've looked at a lot of things. We were talking earlier about the importance of just mentors or friends in cybersecurity as well. Just having someone to look up to or reach out to if you are in cyber. And I think that's good advice generally. But in cyber, do you have any advice for people who might be looking for a mentor or looking for that kind of guidance?
I think it's harder to find a mentor nowadays. I really do, because it's an investment in their time in you. I think always a great place to start, is with a community. In every major town across the world, there's a BSides, right? Join that community or join whatever cybersecurity community there is, to be around colleagues and to be around comrades and friends, right? And other people that you can learn from. And having a mentor doesn't necessarily mean that you have a direct relationship. You can pick people that are winners, right? And that are leaders or that are visionaries, right? And mimic them, And another place to look for mentors or coaches, if you will, is some of those hands-on immersive labs that we talked about, right? Try Hack Me or Hack the Box, those gamified experiences. A lot of the times, the people that are running those in the local communities, like in Ottawa, for instance, those are all done out of the love. It's a passion for them. It's a volunteer basis that they're doing it for the community, and you're gonna get a good mentor out of there, right? Or you're gonna get some good coaching to help guide you, right?
I think that's super important. And I think that there's a lot of really great talent and a lot of very passionate people in our community that people can look up to, as well. And that gives me hope for the future. I think if we can continue to nurture that and support that community, and you're a big supporter of that, so thanks for that. So we've covered a lot of ground today, like a lot. You must be exhausted from everything that we've covered. So I want to thank you for that. As we look forward, I guess, what's one thing that you're excited about?
I'm always top of mind. Like, I'm always excited about BSides Ottawa in our community and the advancements that we're doing in terms of education, collaboration, and community across government, industry, and academia, not just here in Ottawa, but from a national perspective as well, as connecting those communities. I'm always looking for ways for deeper engagement as well with our partners, right? Whether it's bringing a resume clinic in and, helping students or helping people that are looking for a second career break into the field, right? Or helping increase their knowledge and allowing them to have that hands-on immersive learning experience in various fields, right? Whether it's policy, whether it's offensive security, defensive security, even lockpicking and ethical hacking of cars, right? It's just it's great to be a part of that. And it's also great to be in a position now where I'm just managing relationships in my career, right? I'm really just connecting people and connecting things. And yeah, that's what excites me.
Good. Well, it sounds very exciting. And I look forward to continuing the journey of learning more and following along with what's happening in the cybersecurity space and how it's going to enable digital transformation. And the two work very closely together. And digital transformation is also like pushing a boulder up a hill. So really excited to continue to learn and hear from others in the community as well. So thank you for that. We'll just make sure not to let the cows into some of those workshops that you talked about, right? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And that's another episode of Wired for Change.